D Foundation and Design Indiana. And we're very happy tonight to have Professor Joseph Koncelik with us. Before I introduce Professor Koncelik, though, first I would like you to hear from Professor Uwe Koehler about the exhibit just outside.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to let you know that in addition to our scheduled paper architecture exhibit, we have a doubleheader. Another result of the competition, the affordable housing competition. This exhibit will be available for viewing tonight. Since the first prize winners are here from the college, faculty and students from this college, plus many other winners and competitors, we would like to honor these people this Wednesday in the afternoon with a special tea time sponsored by the college. We'll have a nice lecture, and I hope you'll see the exhibit and come back and meet the participants this Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you. This third lecture in the series, Science, Technology, and Human Values, the Design Imperative, will be given by Professor Joseph Koncelik. He has a very considerable resume, and I think that you should know the kind of background that he does have. He currently is head of the Department of Industrial Design at Ohio State University, and in that department there are three programs: Industrial Design, Interior Design, and Graphic Design, with about 200 students in the department. Professor Koncelik has a Bachelor of Industrial Design from Pratt Institute in 1962. He has a Master of Arts from Stanford University in California in 1963, and he was a Fulbright Scholar to England, to the Royal College of Art in London in Great Britain, 1965 and 66. He joined the faculty at Ohio State in 1973 and currently is the professor and chairperson of the Department of Industrial Design. His primary research interests have included gerontological and geriatric aspects of human factors applied to the design of special products and interiors, environmental evaluation, age-related human factors modeling, research integration with design process, and the application of computers to the design process. From 1978 through to 1985, he was president and principal designer in his own firm, Design and Research Services Incorporated. His practice specialized in the research and development of products and interiors for the healthcare and high technology fields. He has taught previously at Cornell University and Rhode Island School of Design. He has been employed by General Motors Corporation, and his clients for consulting services include J.G. Furniture Systems Corporation, Herman Miller Corporation, RCA Consumer Electronics, and many other industrial and professional service concerns. His research has been funded by the Department of Agriculture, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Gerontological Society, from the Administration on Aging Resources. He is the author of over 45 articles, monographs, papers, and his two books that are in our library we use as references all the time in the field of aging. His two books are Designing the Open Nursing Home and Aging and the Product Environment. The first published in 1976 and the Product Environment in 1982. Koncelik is the recipient of several awards in recognition of his research and design work, including the IBD, that's Institute of Business Designers Silver Medal in 1980, Designer's Choice in 1981, National Endowment for the Arts Grants Recognition in 1980, and the National Endowment for the Arts Outstanding Research and Design Award in 1983. He is listed in the Dictionary of International Biography and the International Who's Who in Education. It is a real honor to have him in our school tonight. Welcome, Joe Koncelik.
That was I haven't heard my resume read in quite a while, and thank you very much for that, Charles. When you get to be my age, you can usually hold someone's resume in your hands, and just by the sheer weight, you can tell about how old they are, and that's probably the reaction you're having. And you hear someone trotting through the years. This person has definitely got to be older than you are. The presentation tonight is 5 hours long, and there'll be no breaks, and there will be a 2-hour question session after it's all over. So I hope you're prepared for that. I will try to go through about an hour of slides and talk, and then open it up for discussion, hopefully discussion from all you young folks out there. I noticed that you all filled in the room exactly the way my freshman class at Ohio State does. They start from the back and gradually move forward, and the poor unlucky people who come in late have to sit up right in front and look at me, and that's a fate worse than death. Let me start out by saying, giving a few qualifiers. I've tried to orientate what I have to say tonight to those young folks in the audience. That's anybody younger than me, and that's a lot of people. But there are a lot more people who are older than I am now. I always ask my students if they have formulated a 50-year plan for their careers yet, and then they look around at each other and they don't know what I'm talking about. But then I just say, well, do you have a retirement plan? And that's a 50-year plan. Another qualifier is that I am a product designer. I am an industrial designer. I am not an architect. I work on architectural teams. I've worked in conjunction with architectural folks to both evaluate facilities as well as to design facilities. And I come in with the perspective of someone who either designs products for those facilities or specifies products for facilities, mostly in the institutional field. But I also work with corporations. I'm frequently called in to give them a presentation on aging, sort of a dose of medicine to stimulate thinking. And how do you stimulate thinking about this field? There are an awful lot of prejudices that are held by all of us about growing older. And one of the difficulties that I had when I first began as a 29-year-old snot-nosed assistant professor at Cornell University was I expected that if you gave people information and it was all the truth, that they would respond immediately and change. And I learned the hard lesson that information is only accepted if it conforms to your prejudice. If you have a very closely held prejudice about aging, what you will learn tonight are all those things that conform to your prejudice. I hope that what you will do is hear a few things that fall outside that purview. Let me start off by reading a little thing that occurred in the Wall Street Journal not too long ago. It had to do with something amiss in the blue jean industry. Male baby boomers made blue jeans their uniform in the 1960s and 70s, sparking a denim sales boom. Now they're a major reason behind a sharp drop in jean sales as they switch to sweatpants and casual slacks that better fit their more ample aging bodies. Well, one part is more ample anyway, we know. Total jean sales are estimated to have fallen to about 450 million pairs a year from a peak of 560 million in 1981. Well, there was a very rich person who bought a lot of blue jeans who died, and that's why the sales went down. So this month, a concerned Levi Strauss & Company is beginning its first major TV advertising drive aimed at men in their mid-30s and 40s. By 1990, the number of males 14 to 24 years old, one of Levi's major markets, will have fallen 16% from 1980, the Census Bureau says. At the same time, the number of men 25 to 49 years old will have climbed 29%. It gives you some relative idea of what is happening, and it's a good way of stating the premise of this discussion, which is that aging is a dynamic. It is not a group of old people in rocking chairs with gray, white, blue hair sitting there going back and forth. It's all of you and it's me as well. And certain things happen to us because there are normal aging changes that occur. There are very interesting aspects about this that have to be considered. I think that we have concentrated tremendously upon the aging and the handicapped as a title and as a word combination that we allow ourselves to use to focus upon this population in a certain way. We tend to think that if you're old, you're infirm. And the facts are just the opposite. Only 5% of the population in the United States over the age of 65 is in an institution. It's something over 1 million people, but that's out of 20 million, and by 1995 or so, about 30 million people who are over the age of 65. The aging market itself is worth about $800 billion a year in discretionary income and purchasing power. And out of that, 58% or so, roughly 58%, of all the discretionary income in the United States is held by people 45 years of age and older. People over the age of 55 make up the largest single buying group of single-family dwelling units in the United States. They buy most of the houses in the United States, people over the age of 55. They're the single largest group of people buying appliances in the United States. They buy the refrigerators, the stoves, the microwave ovens. 25% of all the microwave oven sales in the United States are by people over the age of 65. It conforms to their lifestyle and the way in which they want to see food preparation done. I'll give you another interesting statistic which will appeal to you. There are two groups in the United States that are the largest groups learning to drive. Women under the age of 25 and women over the age of 70 are the two largest groups of people learning how to drive automobiles. For the longest part of their lifespan, women did not drive because their husband drove, and the husband drove the car. And then the husband croaked and left the wife alone to drive, to get somewhere. And she was faced with the choice of having to drive the car. And women will continue to outlive men, in spite of the male conspiracy to put more women in the workforce, and I don't know that you know that that was actually the way it happened. Feminine liberation was actually a male conspiracy, so that women would incur heart disease and ulcers at the same rate as men would. It hasn't worked, and women are still outliving men and will tend to do so. And by the age of 80, there will be 2 women for every 1 man. That statistic will hold. All of these things are meant to put little cracks and shatters in that mythological concept that we have and hold so dear about people who grow old. Most people live out their lifespan without going into an institution, without incurring any great degree of infirmity. Some people fall out of that population and incur infirmity, and there is a higher propensity with age to incur infirmity. So what are those things that we have to be concerned about as designers that affect all people? What are normal age changes? And that's where we really start tonight. Another thing that I want to pass on before I get into the slides and go through them in fairly rapid succession is that in order to understand who we are designing for, we have to have, in a sense, a marketing concept. That's extremely important to both architects and industrial designers. There is a person you're designing for, and the architect has more direct contact with people, the end user. Industrial designers are once or twice removed because they work with an industrial client. But we must understand who it is we are designing for. Also understand this, that in the marketing that is done in industry ordinarily, the long tradition is that marketing is a service to an entrepreneur who invents a product and then has to find a way to sell it. In a sense, a lot of marketing that is done in industry today is as if we were driving into the future looking in our rearview mirror. We're very good at gathering facts about ancient history, but then to apply that ahead to the population that requires product and service is quite a different thing. So some of those are concepts to hold. Let me try. As I said before, I'm viewing aging as a dynamic, not as a static thing, not as to say that there is someone who is old and then there are people who are young, but that we are all aging. We're aging inexorably, possibly at different rates. Some of you in the audience at 25 are geriatric, and some of the people who are 70 who are in this audience are not. I have arthritis. My father does not. He's out playing golf, that son of a gun. He played yesterday, and he's complaining about his foot. I'm complaining about my back. In order to better understand what this marketing concept is all about, we have to have specific criteria, and that we have to understand the specific age dimensions that are relevant to the particular population. The population is a market. Manufacturing, who builds and who actually designs the product, and how are they distributed. All of those are factors in agglomerating a market concept for a model. The first model that I wish to propose, and there will be three in all, is one about general aging. If we look at the onset of normal age losses, they begin at the age of 40. Sorry, folks, you thought you were going to put this off for some time. Some of you are already incurring some of those dimensions, such as flattening of the lens. 4 years ago, I didn't wear glasses, and today I do because I've had that occur to me, so that I am farsighted and have trouble reading things up close. In terms of who this population is a very powerful consumer group. They are very well, very capable, with a lot of money to spend, and they are one of the major market shares in the United States today. In terms of manufacturing, all forms of production, high-end design build, mass production, as well as other forms of production. And in terms of distribution, these are the people we will see in the stores, in retail outlets, and all other forms of outlets. Let's talk a little bit about what dynamics of aging affect this group. And in a sense, we're looking at aging, normal age losses that will occur to the sensory modalities. With respect to vision, there are several changes, and I will get into those in detail. With respect to hearing, the hearing loss that is most commonly associated with aging is called presbycusis, or a selective frequency hearing loss, where the top or high frequencies are chopped out of both conversation and background noises, causing a confusion of signals. The real reason that we hear is to protect us. It's a safety device. And when signals become confused, then it's more difficult to deal with the environment. We see some changes to touch and to taste after the ages of 55 and 60, and smell degenerates well after the age of 70. What most will find, if you visit a nursing home where we see people in the latter stages of life, they are using all their sensory modalities to gather signals about environment and people. And when I used to train young students to conduct observation studies in nursing homes, one of the things we had to do was to get them used to old people coming in closer to them than other people came. They would come up and they would touch, They would smell. Of course, they would look at them. They would survey them with try to gather as much information as they possibly could in order to understand who they were, whether they were an intruder, someone they knew, or someone else. This is extremely important to understand about these folks. This is not something that happens overnight. It happens gradually, inexorably, and it will happen to a greater or lesser degree to all of us. Now, I'd like to talk in some detail about vision, because this is extremely important to us as designers and something that we really have to keep in mind. We rely on it so much in terms of information. First of all, with respect to the lens, there is a flattening of the lens, which is a normal age change that will cause people to be farsighted. There will be a crazing of the cornea, scratching, just like the scratches on a Model T Ford's windshield. There will be a yellowing of the lens, which will change the reception of light that penetrates the eye. There will be opacity of the lens as well, so that there are several changes that occur differently for different people, but they will all change to all of these changes will occur to a greater or lesser degree. One of the most important aspects with respect to changes in the eye have to do with a dynamic that has occurred in all of us just simply because we're human beings and our receptivity to light is different than other animals. Cones in the retina provide sensitivity to color, and we are, in a sense, a red-green-blue receiver. But the photopigment sensitivity of the eye is unequal in the cones. 64% of the cones contain red photopigment, 32% contain green photopigment, and only 2% at birth contain blue photopigment. We are naturally less receptive to blue light. Not only that, interestingly enough, blue sensitivity is the sensitivity we gradually lose as we age. So that this is a very important thing with respect to the new age of computer information exchange and transmission of information through light-emitting devices of all kinds. Other changes that will occur, there will be 3 times the rate of adaptation for someone over the age of 70 to someone who is under the age of 25. There will be less ability to function in low light, less ability to judge distances, and I will show examples of that. Obviously, foveal vision changes, and there will be problems of focus as well. These comparative pictures were taken with an empathic lens. The one on the right is shot with an empathic lens, a lens that was developed by Leon Pastelan at the University of Michigan in the Institute of Gerontology. It simulates 50% of the opacity of the human lens. There are noticeable changes from the picture on the left. Obviously, you can see the diffusion of light entering the eye and the high sensitivity to glare, which is one of the most significant changes that occurs in aging. So let's try to apply that to product design. I think I mentioned before that 25% of the microwave ovens sold, almost from the onset of the time they were offered in the marketplace, were purchased by people over the age of 65 who changed the way in which they prepare meals. They prepare fewer meals, they eat more frequently, and they are very into convenience foods. Now we take a look at the menu guide on the right-hand side, viewed through the empathic lens, and we can see how the information is diffused. It's interesting to note that since white light contains all color, we have an ability to focus on white figures on a black background more easily than we do the reverse. So you have to look at that application very clearly, very carefully. I have always loved this particular backsplash range design because it contains almost every type font known to man, as well as a high specular glare off the surface, and you can see the comparison for yourself, the kind of diffused lighting that occurs off those knobs. However, here's the technology we're going to be confronted with more and more because it is so easy to produce. This is one of our touch-sensitive control panels on a washer, of a washer-dryer combination. A touch-sensitive panel is made very easily. You can take a piece of acrylic and silk screen it, and behind it you can photograph a printed circuit, and that forms the touch sensitivity part, and the two things are sandwiched together. However, when they're put in combination, they're virtually wiped out when they are put under a light source, and that is extremely difficult to utilize for anyone. Here is a VCR in combination with an on-screen programming device using a television set, an RCA television set, and the interesting little doohickey, the remote control. I think a remote control like this one with 4 buttons on it is about my limit of tolerance in terms of learning and handling those devices. And what is also interesting is there is no remote control that I know of that isn't used in exactly the same lighting conditions that I'm using it in right now. Most people do not watch television in a sunlit room. Yet my RCA remote control has 52 push buttons on it. There are only 2 people in my family who know how to use it or get enjoyment out of using it. One is myself, because I've learned how to use all the buttons without looking at them, as if I was blind. And my 2-year-old granddaughter really enjoys it and pays absolutely no attention to what happens when she pushes the buttons. She just goes randomly and makes all kinds of changes occur on the TV set. So that's one of the problems right there, is because we have the potential to display information and we have the potential to provide all kinds of control, we do it. It's technology for the hell of it. We have so much technology that is available to us at low cost that we just do it. I think one of the primary violators of this today is the American automobile industry with their display devices in their instrumentation, in which virtually every piece of information about the car that's going on while you're driving it is displayed simultaneously as you drive it. I drove a Buick Riviera not too long ago, and to operate the radio, one had to pull the car off the road and park it so that one could look at the animated display, computer-generated display, and push the touch-sensitive screen. I think we've just gone too far with those kinds of things. But another kind of mistake is made here, as you can see. The figures are in blue light. Fortunately, they're large enough, especially large when we amplify them on a screen this way, to be seen. But they are harder to see than white light and harder to see than amber figures on a dark background as well, which happens to be the standard for all European display devices, cathode ray tube devices. So here, an elderly person, someone over the age of 55, who is in the market for appliances, is confronted with all of these mistakes, essentially mistakes. By the way, I made this presentation to RCA Corporation about 5 years ago and found out that the largest percentage of their designers had been with the company about 30 years. Some of them were now 65 years of age, and the only way in which they could apply the graphics to the various VCRs and television control panels and the rest was to look through about 2 different magnifying glasses to get them large enough so that they could see it to put it on the panel. In fact, when I started talking, one designer jumped up in the audience and just protested vehemently that they had gone in this direction. Many of the devices are now black on black, and even you have to have, I think every house today should come equipped with a 12-year-old child. And a 12-year-old child is the only person who can learn these things immediately and virtually use all of them in the dark. One of the ways in which the situation can be ameliorated is to use a design technique called redundant queuing. And redundant queuing means that you use 2 or more sensory modalities, or you rely upon 2 or more sensory modalities to convey information. In this case, this is a prototype computer display device for medical purposes, and it's meant for use by elderly people. It was done by a student in one of my classes, and as you can see, all of the letters are appropriate in terms of their display of white against black, but they're also embedded in a slight hole so that the finger can travel over the panel, be located on the position for the control, and press it. This is another piece of technology that was abandoned by Westinghouse a few years ago, but now is making a resurgence. It's called a thermal induction cooktop. No heat is transferred to the top of the stove. It's only transferred to steel core cookware through excitation of the molecules in the pan. And when it excites those molecules, they heat up and then heat the food. The controls at the side are placed by each burner, as opposed to that previous example I showed you on a backsplash where you had to reach across the burners and find the appropriate knob. And you have the experience, most of you have had it, of turning on a burner, coming back a little bit later, the tea kettle is sitting over here, and there's a bright glowing red burner over here. We never learned that system. I never learned it, and no one else learns it either, because our eyes don't connect with the signals that we're getting from the device. But in this case, the controls are directly adjacent to the burner. And full on, you can place your hand down on the burner and it will not be burned. So there are technologies available to us that are very appropriate for use by everybody. And in this marketplace, those things that we design with a sensitivity to aging will affect beneficially all the other age groups that use it. This is not a special design area here. We're using the dimensions of aging as the limitations or parameters for design for everyone. And it's not difficult to do. This is another example in a very small way. It's kind of middle tech. This is an illuminated magnifier, and it's an example of how industry uses marketing in a reverse way. We think of using marketing to go out and identify a market, design a product, and put it out there and sell it. That would be really nice, but it doesn't happen very much. Bosch and Lohm had been selling this illuminated magnifier for many, many years, and they thought that it was meant for people who were hobbyists, railroad modelers, stamp collectors, all those folks were the people who were buying this illuminated magnifier. They did a marketing survey and found out that 80% of their sales were in nursing homes. 80%. And then one of those devices, which is a 4-watt bulb, fell into the lap of an elderly lady in a nursing home who happened to be wrapped in an acrylic blanket. It set the blanket on fire and she died from her burns. There was no litigation against the company, but it certainly made them sufficiently sensitive that they went out and redesigned the product. And in view of the changes, those are that other piece is one of the resultant designs. We also did some color studies to see which colors people preferred, and this is a quick and dirty kind of color study that we did at that time, in which we painted the magnifiers various colors and had people choose the one they preferred. And we found that in every case, the brighter it got, the more it was preferred. And we were returning to this nursing home where we were conducting this study 2 and 3 times, and at the end of the study we were painting the objects fluorescent orange, and people were choosing that one over the other. They were choosing the one they could see. That's the most important aspect of what we learned from that. Not necessarily on the basis of preference. This is a no-tech solution to a very important problem of diet cards in a nursing home. These all look alike, but with a little color coding, they can be made to look different with respect to the different kinds of diets that people are on. Now, this is, in my opinion, a sensitive use of the capacity of a graphic designer. It's the kind of thing that graphic designers can do well, and really doesn't cost that much to do. You can even make them coordinated with the condiments. So those are some concepts of how to approach that market. Some of that was slightly institutional, but it includes the widest range of all people who are in that dynamic of aging. There is a middle group of people that we have to be concerned about. They live independently. but they are infirm. This is an elderly population that is hard to address. It is the hardest population to address by designers, no matter what designer we're talking about. Whether it's an architect, an industrial designer, product designer, or an interior designer, we have very little contact with this population. They are the middle old to old, 15% of the independent aged, modest to low income, 70% of them own their own homes, and those homes are in rapidly deteriorating condition. And the manufacturing is very interesting. It's mostly self-help. They do it themselves. It's specialty manufacturing. There are little catalogs you can acquire. I don't know if many of you may not know this, but Sears Roebuck, I don't think they're called Sears Roebuck anymore, are they? It's just Sears Company. See, that's how far back I go. I knew there was someone else connected with that company. They have a catalog they put out that is on medical supply and special products. And if you're interested in this area, I urge you to just go down to the local Sears store and pick one up, because you'll be interested in the different kinds of devices that are made available. It's small quantity production. Some of it, when it is approached by design, is subsidized, and the distribution, as I said, through specialty catalogs and localized types of exchange. People who have made a ramp for their front door will make a ramp for the lady down the block, and then he'll make one for 3 or 4 other people as well. Also, information distributed by occupational therapists and other caregivers. That's the way this market is approached. We're also starting to see a divergence of characteristics with this group. This divergence is explained best by the lady who approached a famous gerontologist, Karl Eisdorfer, and said, "What will I be like when I get old?" And he said, "You'll be just like you are now, only more so." And what that is an intensification of individual characteristics. That is something that occurs to all of us as we grow old. I'm a very grumpy person by nature, so I will be an irascible grump as I reach my 70th year, and will be intolerable by my 80th year if I live that long. But we see this divergence of characteristics. People become more individualized, not more condensed as a population. It's interesting to see us stereotype old people as all being alike, but if we study the populations and we study people as they age, we see they're more different as they age. There are 100-year-old people who still jog. There are 25-year-old people who are in wheelchairs. There are 100-year-old people who have 30 different diseases who are living in nursing homes and still alive. There are others who are perfectly well. So there are all kinds of characteristics in this population, and it diverges more and more. We do find in this population, however, this middle group that I talked about for Model 2, that their activities are more focused on close-to-home activities of daily living. They're more focused on what they can do within a close home range as well, with the exception of the rural elderly in this group. Rural elderly are dependent on their car. They have no fixed range. It's only as far as the car can take them. And they are not necessarily fixed to a specific neighborhood or town. So we have this person looking out through the window of their vehicle and aiming their car. As you can see, they're already having trouble, even without the empathic lens, of reading the dashboard and the instrumentation. Illumination might help, but a confusion of information being illuminated would not. And with the empathic lens, we start to lose that Volkswagen out there, and maybe that's good. If we could line up the hood ornament with that sucker, we could take another one of those guys out of commission completely. But that is part of the problem. Remember that older lady who just learned to drive. She's 70 years of age, and she's now out there on the freeway with you. And when you get behind her and she's moving along at 40, just remember that she is taking in information as fast as she can and processing it to keep her functional in that mode of transportation. Very difficult for her to do. If she goes under a bridge underpass, the change of light can be so dramatic that she has maybe a full second or more coming out the other side where she can't see anything at all. And if there's anything in her path, she may not see it. She may miss it entirely. And when she's finished driving her car, if she's successful enough to get where she's going, she's usually shopping, and then she is confronted with a number of pieces of information that are not very readable either. With a lot of slimy frozen foods that have very low level, a lot of graphics, all these instructions on how to prepare, all in the wrong typeface, all in the wrong letter form, and again, that 12-year-old child should be accompanying that person so that he or she could read it. One of the most disturbing little differences that occurs is that the just noticeable heights lose their difference in vision. 3 inches of change at a curb site, or closely related stairs in height, fall out of view in terms of their difference. And we can see that dynamic happening here with the empathic lens and that curb cut. Notice the lack of visibility of the edges of those stairs in a public housing project for the elderly, but the number on the door seems to loom up loud and clear. We also have a series of human factors consideration because of the onset of arthritis. How well can one turn over one's hand? When one turns the hand over, one immediately loses strength in grip. And the more one turns it over, the harder it is to do. I was very curious at the doorknobs in the hotel section of the student union over here that are all round and very, very thin. I've never seen a harder doorknob to turn in my life. Did you go out and specially find those? You did? You made a concerted effort to find those. It's amazing. Manipulative tasks all change, and especially manipulative tasks at the hand. For someone who is 25 years of age, it's not uncommon to have 95 pounds of palmar grip strength in your hand. But that can be reduced to virtually 5 pounds for someone who has arthritis. Tip prehension for you in a finger is 30 pounds of force. It virtually disappears and becomes 0 for someone with advanced arthritis. All of those are major concerns. Because I had a herniated disc in my back not too long ago and spent 6 weeks flat on my floor finding all the paint spots that the painter missed when he did my house, I know another interesting statistic. 30 adults out of every 100 have a herniated disc, misaligned spine. Most of them are not yet medical problems, but back problems are very, very common throughout the population and are increased with age. No, this one is a little better than the one in the student union, but this is some demonstration of doorknob design here. And here's a better solution, of course. This happens to be in a not a public housing project, a private pay housing project in Akron. It happens to be a round building, so each older person put their own symbol on the door so they could identify their door. This particular gentleman was present at the opening of King Tut's tomb. So, that's his symbol. Notice the doorknob. It's not a knob. It's a lever device, which is appropriate. It's easier to open. And notice the return, so one cannot slide one's cuff over the end, and also you can attach a string, so you can pull the string if you can't do anything else. These are sensitive little things that can easily be placed in almost every setting. In Europe, they use lever door handles almost exclusively. And many Europeans refer to the United States as the land of the round doorknob. I don't know if you're aware of that or not. The seating dimension becomes extremely important, and with respect to you folks who may be architects, I think architects have contributed some of the most outstanding seating in the history of design in this country. Now that seems to be moving to industrial designers who are involved in seating. But there are some extremely important aspects of this because for many people, where they sit becomes their home. The chair becomes an environment, especially in the institutional setting, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. In terms of anthropometric characteristics or body dimensioning, the 5th percentile female in the older population is akin to the 5th percentile female in the normal population. It's a shorter population. When we look at all characteristics, older people are smaller than younger people, with one exception, and that's hip width. So for some reason our butts grow as we grow older. I'm not quite sure of all of that, but I can certainly attest to it from my own personal experience. One of the most significant aspects of designing a chair for the elderly is to make certain that the leading edge of the armrest is placed outboard of the edge of the chair itself. In other words, where the upper leg breaks to the lower leg, right at that edge. If the armrest extends beyond that point, it is possible for someone to pull themselves forward over the center of gravity of their, extend the center of gravity out over their heels and rise up from the chair. That's probably the most significant aspect of entrance and egress. And this older lady is going to demonstrate that for us in these two pictures. You can see that her knee closure is less than it would be for a younger person, so she has to move the center of gravity of her body further out over her knees to egress the chair. Now, if her hand position was further out, closer to her knees, she would be able to egress that chair easily. Since you're all young enough, let's try this as an experiment. I'm going to have you sit up and then get down. First, just stand up from where you are. Everybody just stand up. Okay, now you can sit down. Now, remembering how you did that, take the heels, your heels, and move them just 2 inches out farther. And now stand up. Okay, sit down. When I used to be a lot worse when I was a younger person, and I had people move their heels out 6 inches, and then everybody would groan, and it would be terrible, and nobody was getting up, and I would say, see, that's why you don't understand. But the most important aspect of that is without that knee closure, you have to throw the center of gravity of your body further out over the heels of your feet. Also, for elderly people, for people who are 70 and 75 and older, there is less muscle control in the upper parts of the thigh, so they drop to the chair, and then rising off the surface of that chair is hard as well. There's about 8 inches of drop or 8 inches of play where there's little or no muscle control to egress the chair. Now here is one solution to the problem. It's a sprung-loaded seat. And now, the question is anthropometrically, if we look at body weight, the variation can be between 80 pounds for the little old lady at 5 foot 1 inches tall and 240 pounds for the oldest male in the population. Now, if we gear it to the 240-pound male, then the little old lady has got to be pulled out of the wall by somebody. Now, I've used that joke many times, and I've often frowned upon these lift chairs, but I've most recently discovered through the work of one of my master's candidates something that makes this quite serious, and that is these chairs are sold by prescription with a doctor's prescription, and you are entitled to an 80% Medicare rebate on these chairs. There are electrically motorized versions, there are inflatable air support versions, there are sprung-loaded versions, all kinds. And this market for this chair last year was $26 million. And that's a considerable amount of money to be spending on devices that I think in many instances are questionable in their design. Also, the conformation of materials in the chair are extremely important, just to give you a little bit of idea about how these things go about. In other words, if the chair compresses too hard, the sensitivity to stress in the body for sitting, 60% of the load of the human body is on 2 points on the hips called the ischial tuberosity. and that rubs on the tissue of the buttocks. And for people in institutional settings, it can wind up causing decubitus ulcers if they sit too long. This chair, which is called, here's the title, Golden Years Chair, is made by a manufacturer without a design staff. And in fact, that's not uncommon. There are 5,000 manufacturers of furniture in the United States, and only 23 have design staffs. Most of the others go out of business very rapidly. And the way in which they do design is to copy out of other people's catalogs. So what they do is, if they have a length of tubing, you see that square tubing piece on the front there, and they find out that they can make 8 legs out of one length of tubing by cutting an inch off each leg, they do it because it's economical. And so we wind up with a chair that has a 15-inch high leading edge from the floor and 12 inches to the back. Well, if I get that little old lady I showed you in the beginning into this chair, she'll never get out. It's impossible. And the other problem, of course, is that problem of hardness on the ischial tuberosity, so people tend to pile up materials on the chair. They get higher and higher. Well, I guess that solves the height problem, but unfortunately, you can never make it soft enough using that as a substitute. Here's an experimental device to show how to get that leading edge out. While the proportion of the chair changes, it is easier to egress the chair. This man has hemiparesis on one side of his body, but he's able to egress the chair. This woman is making a transfer from a wheelchair to a static chair. So there are all kinds of things that one can do by involving oneself in an investigation which leads to a very simple design change. Very small, but from a standpoint of human factors, essential and very important. Now I am not a genius, and I copy wherever I can get a good idea, but the people who precede us in this kind of effective design are the Scandinavians. And the Scandinavians have a system of support from the government that has allowed research and development of design devices and architecture for many years, ever since the end of World War II, when they had such an infirm population in many of the Scandinavian countries, Norway, Denmark, Finland. They had as many as 30% of their population infirm, and they had to change the way in which they delivered health care. And along with it, they inaugurated a process by which they supported design. So here is a chair from Sweden, and it has Sweden was neutral during the war, but has a parallel process of design development. You can see many interesting innovations, such as the way in which the end of the chair is handled quite beautifully so that an arthritic hand can grasp the end and move out. Well, let me go back a second because a couple other things. The height of the chair can change. It has a simple detent device on the leg that allows it to be raised or lowered. And they do not believe in vinyl-covered chairs. They use a fabric device that is impregnated with an odor-eliminating device so that even if there is incontinence, defecation, and urination in the chair will eliminate the odor. Model 3 has to do with the institutional population. And this is the population that has concerned us the most as designers. It has been our focus, that 5% of people over the age of 65, 25% of the population over 80. And while the population percentage is small, the amount of dollars consumed and the amount of design input made is tremendous. So that's extremely important for us to consider. We find that there are a host of pathologies that affect this population, and we find a high incidence of correlation between general debility, mobility, posture problems, pain, and incoordination across that spectrum. This particular model was designed by M. Powell Lawton, and it was once said that there are 2,000 publications on environment and aging. 1,000 of them were written by 1,000 different authors, and the other 1,000 were written by Powell Lawton. And if you've ever looked into this field, Powell Lawton is a prodigious writer on environment and aging, and someone to be looked at very carefully. His Confidence Press model essentially says one extremely important thing about this population, as well as others as well, that are infirm. And that is, as people progressively become more infirm, their tolerance to both low stress and high stress environment declines. Now, a nursing home, traditional nursing home built in the hospital model, is a place where there is very low stress. In fact, or very low press, as he would put it. Low press, or press that is too low for that population, may also result in aberrant behavior and maladaptive behavior to that institution, as well as to other people in the institution. Another way to envision this is the way Robert Sommer did in his book Personal Space, and that is to see the population with increased vulnerability. Young people tend to have a very hard shell bubble around them, the life space, as we used to call it in the 60s. But that life space and that life bubble tends to become soft, amorphous, and extend outward, even more so from the body as we age, so that people affect one another tremendously. In terms of the design of institutional settings, we know that the patient-resident room, the personal space that people occupy, is the single most important space of that facility, yet in most instances it receives the least amount of design attention. The next most important space is the corridor, where they make interchanges. We also know that if you design a product, products work best if they are unifunctional, if they do one thing well. The notable exception to that is the Swiss Army knife. But other than that, most products work well if they do one thing well. Spaces are different. Spaces work well when they are multifunctional, when they can provide many more behaviors, especially in the institutional setting. And we see that the patient-resident room, if we match it against our typical behaviors as designed or devised by Meyer-Spivak, has the greatest range of all. There must be a tremendous accommodation of a range of behaviors. These are from behavior mapping studies that we did some years ago, but they illustrate some very interesting points. These are observation studies using symbols to place where people located themselves and how they interrelated. In this particular example, there is a nursing station, a lounge, an external lounge in the corridor space, a dining room, and the nexus of 6 corridors, as well as the entrance to that space. And what happens over time is that this lounge becomes overcrowded. People are drawn there because this population likes to passively engage in activity. They like to see things going on. And I'll tell you a little story so that can amplify that. There was a nursing home I visited in upstate New York, and off the rear they had this wonderful solarium with a big expanse of glass, and you could look out on a mountain. It was a beautiful place with a stream, and when I was there, there was a buck jumping over the stream with the full rack on his head. And there wasn't anybody there to see it. All the old people were out front in the lobby, which overlooked the parking lot and the tracks where trains were going by. Because there was a lot of activity out there, and that's what they wanted to be around. They didn't want to be back there where nothing was happening at all. So these types of high active areas tend to draw people into them so that they can see what's going on. But the more activity that occurs, the less interchange. There's a trade-off there that has to be reckoned with. Another mistake that's frequently made is to misjudge that population in terms of ambulatory status. And in this instance, we have several examples of this particular solarium. The chairs all meant for those people who are ambulatory were not used because 100% of the people in this facility were in wheelchairs or geriatric chairs. Also, we find that hallways and other areas can be used for purposes other than what they were supposed to be designed for. Taking a look at personal space. In the first book that I wrote, I talked about what I called asymmetrical ownership as opposed to biaxial ownership of a room space. In asymmetrical ownership, which is the typical type of nursing home room, one old lady owns the window and the other old lady owns the door. And then they fight over how much light there should be and who gets a visitor. So they have to make trades that way. In biaxial ownership, where there's more equal ownership of the space, and that's usually visual territory, there is more equality in terms of the use of that particular space. However, the problem architecturally is that biaxial rooms have a longer roof line to design, and therefore cost more to design even for the same square footage. Here is an asymmetrical room in which there are two people. It's a fairly typical nursing home, and it's in a facility where they gave plain bedspreads to those folks who were on Medicaid and flowered bedspreads to those people who were private pay. And then they let everybody know the difference. Now that's one way to cause interaction. Typically, these spaces have too little square footage for maneuverability as well, for ease of transfers. 80% of the accidents that occur in nursing homes occur at bedside, either from transfers or from people slipping when they are ambulatory on wet floors. It's showing a various number of positions. That one's in backwards, so it's not very useful. In terms of what the space should provide to a person, there has to be an area of display, because ownership is part of control. Self-esteem and control are part of a person being able to personalize space. That could be personal storage, a place to socialize. This would be a wonderful room, except for one thing: it's terribly expensive and very difficult to build. But we can see how some of these things work. People tend to compress their life space in an institutional setting. In other words, this population still owns stuff, and there's less space to display it all, and that display means more to them at this point because it's very much attached to the way, to their sense of control over their personal space. So here we have some display of personal items. Here we have a different kind of room plan that allows for different placements of beds so people have free choice. All of these things are important in that kind of a facility. One of the most interesting aspects of corridors in terms of interchange of people moving through space is how they are negotiated. And in most institutional settings, we emphasize similarity instead of difference. Difference allows us to understand where we are in space. Yet institutional settings have a lot of similarity. And of course, other kinds of problems as well. A high degree of specular glare. And with the problem of being able to, of negotiating this corridor, we can see that the tile lines here make it seem as though it is a staircase. And several elderly in this facility told us that they were, had a difficult time negotiating this particular space because they felt that it could be a staircase. Carpeting can be extremely important in terms of clearing up some of these problems, both in terms of cutting down specular glare as well as softening the background noise to facilitate the problem of the problem of hearing. Not facilitate the problem of hearing, but to facilitate hearing. This issue of presbycusis, where clatter is confused with conversation, is an extremely important one for the institutional population. It's a very interesting corridor where people have a hard time seeing their footfall. You can see the luminaires and the very dark tiled floor. Notice the specular glare, which is an extremely large problem here. And here is with the, no, I didn't have a shot with the empathic lens, but it's almost impossible to see anything in that corridor. We find that what older people will do in these corridors is to move to the wall, to grasp the handrail and keep out of the center. It's the same philosophy as the running back on a football team who heads for the sideline because you can't get tackled from the bench. Well, the same thing is true for the elderly woman negotiating this corridor. She sticks close to the wall because very, very few things can come out from the wall and knock her down. But if she's in the middle, she may not be able to see where she is. Notice I keep saying she, because institutional populations are predominantly female. And it's not uncommon to be in a facility of 100 beds where there will be 5 men who are having a hell of a time. Another way to address the problem, of course, is to change where illumination occurs. Valence lighting at the ceiling and illuminating the sides of the corridors can be very helpful. Of course, one still has to work on the problem of specular glare. Also, the use of wheelchairs in conjunction with corridor design is extremely important because older people with arthritis tend not to move the wheels forward. They reach out and grasp the handrail at the side and pull themselves along. Now, if the arm of the wheelchair is lower than the handrail, it will pull the hub of the wheelchair into the wall. And within a couple of months, you will be repairing corridors in nursing homes if you're not aware of that particular problem. So all of these little things add up to a tremendous amount of design interchange. Also, varying the illumination is extremely important. This is an extremely good facility called Menorah Park, which is a Jewish home for the aging in Shaker Heights, Ohio, and the facility administrator changes the artwork every 6 months. There are 200 new pieces of artwork that he puts on the wall to induce people to get out into the corridors to see them, to make them walk. And it's a very useful device, and it works. Notice here the way in which we've done the sign. You see health, and then you see nurse clinic. Well, we're covering over part of the sign, so health center, but nurse clinic is what the elderly people called it. It's combined with a pictogram, and of course the letters are far more visible. White light on a black background. Extremely important. I have one of the world's largest collection of toilet slides, and you will now sit through 442 toilet shots. No, actually, I've reduced it. It's interesting to note that here is a part of a facility, the architects should pay a lot of attention to this, where so much is left, or has been in the past, left unspecified. Notice the use of a 4 or 5 foot tile line around part of the bathroom without tiling the rest of it. Frequently, a workman walks down the hall with a mirror in his hand and says, "Where do you want this?" And someone says, "In the bathroom." So he goes in, and the easiest thing to do is to mount it above the tile. So that's where he puts the mirror. Now, if you're a little old lady in a wheelchair moving in here, you better hope that the tile is really shiny, because you're not going to see your face or your teeth. Also notice the position of the handrail next to the jaunding. It's interesting to note that there's a high degree of hemiparesis, or paralysis on one side of the body. Well, in this facility, you better not be paralyzed on the right side, because you're going to have a heck of a time getting off the john. And here is a canted mirror design. That happens very frequently. Here is a canted mirror design which allows a person in a wheelchair to move up to the sink, and because of the slant of the mirror, they can see their whole body all the way down to their lap. I think that's very useful to do. Very simple. Probably doesn't cost any more to do it as well. Now we're moving outside. And the way in which I've showed you these slides on the institutional setting is to start with the patient resident room and then go to the place that's hardest to get to, outside. Okay? So we're going to look at ramps, stairs, and handrails. Now this is a fairly young person using this ramp up to this housing project for the elderly. This is in Colorado, in Denver, Colorado. And he was ready for admission to that facility by the time he made it up that ramp. Ramps are really a very poor design solution to the problem. Sometimes they're the only alternative, but they are not really a good solution because it's extremely difficult for older persons who are ambulatory to use a ramp. For this reason, and I'll try to demonstrate it if I can without pulling my cord out. When you walk, you lean forward and you catch your center of gravity with your foot. But when an older person walks, someone in advanced years, there is roll of the pelvis and the foot shuffles out from under the center of gravity. All right, so there is this shuffling gait that occurs with advanced years. Now try to do that on a ramp. The CG is now in back of you and your feet are going out forward. So you have to climb up a handrail at the side, if you're lucky, if there is one around. Well, there is one off to the side here. Now this particular ramp was in a nursing home. that we observe. And getting out is relatively easy. And I must commend the architect for the thoughtfulness of putting a brick wall at the end. And there is some grass on the other side of it, so if you're able to negotiate that flip, you will land in the flowers. This is one of the reasons why I say that this is one of the most extremely difficult things to design well, is a ramp. And when I love the ramps with the switchbacks. All the kids with skateboards find those ramps. They really love them, but they're extremely difficult to negotiate with a wheelchair. We have some of the dimensions for ramp design here, and once you're beyond 30 inches of rise, you must have a ratio of 1 to 20, which is extremely difficult in most settings. So that's not really all that useful. Okay, those are the ends of my slides. If you want to put the lights back on, thank you. I just have a few concluding remarks, and then I'll ask if there are any questions in the group. Aging is an inexorable change that's going to happen to the American population. As designers, and I'm looking out at a sea of young people here that I anticipate most of whom are architects or other designers, even if you're not, your lives will be spent designing for people who are aging, or it will be spent in service to people who are older than you. In fact, in 1980, Joe Califano, the then Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, predicted that the health care budget for the federal government would be, in the year 2030, $650 billion per year, and would outstrip the defense budget. And after making that statement, Califano lost his job 30 days later, and they dissolved Health, Education, and Welfare. And I always thought that was one way to view the problem. There's no problem that's so large it cannot be run away from. That's a very good philosophy. And it has been followed extensively. Since I'm in Indiana, I might say that if someone is looking for something for Vice President Quayle to do, I think that it would behoove this country to start a long-range planning approach on federally supported services to the older population. And it couldn't be a better move to make politically. So maybe I ought to send that letter to the White House, I'm not sure. Or maybe there's an address in Indiana where I can send that as well. Another serious issue that I've tried to allude to here is that American industry has not been quick on the uptake. The manufacturing community is still operating with an antiquated marketing model. And when I gave this presentation to White Westinghouse, and the marketing director strode into the room and said, "Here are all the refrigerators we make, from the 8 cubic foot refrigerator to the 32 cubic foot refrigerator. Your job is to tell me which of those refrigerators I should be selling to the elderly." And I said, "The 4 cubic foot refrigerator." And it was true that this smaller package, which the Japanese were making, was the one that was relevant for this particular market group. It's a problem, and it's a problem we haven't yet overcome. If designers don't learn about this population, I don't feel they will be employable. I think the time is coming when, if you don't have some background in gerontology, it almost should be a common course for all university students now, a course on aging. You will be in a great deal of difficulty in terms of your orientation to the marketplace. I always believe that young people were meant as entertainment for older people. I like to consider young people as being very interesting diversions. But they also are the hope of the world, and they give me an awful lot of hope as I have taught them. And I know that my future is in good hands. Thank you. I appreciate that. If you're interested in this subject matter at all, beyond what I have talked about today, there is a box up here with folders in it, and that contains 2 articles that I have written. One is an article, and one is a chapter from a book on human factors and aging. So feel free to take them if you're interested in that material at all. But I will be, I would very much like to take any questions you might have from the floor.
If there are no questions from the floor, Professor Koncelik is available here for the next minutes until your questions are answered. Thanks. The books are up